The day had started the way most days did for Cole Madron. Quiet, gray, and heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. The morning mist had hung low over the land, curling like smoke around the fence posts that lined his small property near the Verd River. Cole had been awake before dawn, splitting wood behind the cabin until his shoulders burned. Work was the only thing that kept his mind still.
You're safe now.
When his hands were busy, the past didn't speak so loud. The world he'd left behind was one of dust, blood, and men who carried grudges like extra bullets. For 15 years he'd lived by the gun, riding from one trail job to another, protecting cattle drives or saloons that paid just enough to make a man forget how short life really was. He'd seen the worst in men, and sometimes in himself. That was the reason he'd bought this small piece of land. Not for profit, not even for peace, just for the silence. Silence, he'd found, could be both punishment and forgiveness, depending on the day. The rain had been steady all week, leaving the river swollen and the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Cole wiped his brow with the back of his hand, driving another nail into the post. The rhythmic sound of hammer meeting wood was almost meditative. The land was slick under his boots, the mud tugging at him as if trying to remind him that he belonged nowhere, not even here. He ignored it, just like he ignored the memories that sometimes came crawling out of the dark when he closed his eyes at night. A hawk cried overhead, its wings cutting through the mist like a knife. The sound made him look up briefly, scanning the horizon, where nothing moved, just the wind pushing through the grass and the river rolling brown and mean below the ridge. The world felt untouched, raw, the kind of place a man could disappear in. He paused to check the line of posts, squinting against the drizzle. He'd been meaning to finish this stretch before winter set in. The work gave him a sense of purpose, simple, honest, without blood attached. Each post sunk into the ground felt like a boundary between who he'd been and who he was trying to become. Then it came. At first, he thought it was the wind shifting through the trees. A low, broken sound that rose and fell with the gusts. But as he straightened and pulled his hat down against the rain, it came again, clearer this time. A voice, faint, distant, but unmistakably human. Cole froze, the hammer still in his hand. The sound carried over the river, thin but sharp enough to cut through the storm's dull roar. It wasn't the groan of an animal or the cracking of a branch. It was a cry, high, desperate, and filled with the kind of fear that made a man's blood turn cold. He turned slowly toward the river. The world seemed to hold its breath. The current moved fast, swollen from days of rain, churning with mud and broken branches. Cole's eyes scanned the surface, searching for movement. Nothing. Just the restless water and the dark smear of the far bank. Then, in a flash, he saw it, something pale breaking the surface. A hand, maybe, or a scrap of fabric, before vanishing again. For a moment he didn't move. His mind told him it could be debris, a trick of the current. But the sound came again, weaker now. A cry for help. And that was all it took. The hammer hit the mud before he even realized he'd dropped it. Cole was running. The slope to the river was slick, but the ground soft under each step. But he didn't care. His boots slid, mud splashing up his legs. Every instinct he'd spent years trying to bury came roaring back to life. He'd been a man who acted fast once. Too fast. And though he'd promised himself he was done with that kind of life, this was different. This wasn't about killing. This was about saving. The river's edge came up quick, the ground falling away into a steep drop. He caught himself on a branch, heart hammering against his ribs. The current below moved with violent purpose, swirling in muddy circles that could swallow a man whole. Somewhere in that chaos, something, or someone, was fighting to stay alive. He spotted her then, a figure maybe 30 yards downstream, caught between the pull of the current and a tangle of reeds near the far bank. Her hair, black as coal, spread out on the surface like ink. The river dragged her sideways, jerking her head under and up again. She was struggling, but the fight was fading. Cole didn't think. He kicked off his coat, unbuckled his gun belt, and dove. The cold hit like a fist. The shock stole his breath, locking his chest tight. For a heartbeat, he thought he wouldn't make it. The weight of the river pressing down, filling his ears with the roar of moving water. But he forced his limbs to move, slicing through the current with strong, steady strokes. He'd crossed rivers before, in storms, in floods, in worse than this, but never for something that mattered. The current fought him, pulling sideways, dragging at his legs. He angled his body, cutting through the flow. His lungs burned, his arms heavy, but he kept going. Every few seconds he lost sight of her. Then he saw her again, closer now, an arm, a shoulder, the pale line of her face half submerged. "Hold on," he shouted, though the wind and water swallowed his words. She didn't hear him. Her head dipped again beneath the surface. He reached her just as she went under. His hand found her arm, cold, thin, and limp. He wrapped his arm around her chest and kicked hard, forcing them both upward. She broke the surface with a gasp that barely sounded human, coughing and choking. He turned her head to keep her airway clear and began the slow, brutal fight back to shore. The weight of her soaked dress dragged them both down. Twice, the current spun them sideways, threatening to tear her from his grip. He locked his arms tighter, jaw clenched, legs burning. He could feel his strength slipping, every kick slower than the last. But then his boots brushed something solid. Mud, the edge of the riverbed. He pushed harder, pulling her inch by inch toward the bank. By the time he reached shallow water, his vision was blurring. He half crawled, half dragged her up onto the muddy shore, collapsing beside her. For a long moment, the only sound was the rush of the river and his own ragged breathing. He turned her over carefully. Her lips were blue, her eyes half open but unfocused. He pressed an ear to her chest. There, a heartbeat, faint but there. Relief hit him like another wave. He pushed gently on her back, water spilling from her mouth. She coughed weakly, a sound that filled the empty world around them. Cole sat back, mud-streaked and shivering, watching as she fought for breath. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what kind of trouble had put her in that river. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him that had gone silent long ago stirred again. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something older, something he'd thought the years of violence had killed. Whatever it was, it whispered to him, "Don't let her die." He pulled her close, shielding her from the wind. The rain had stopped, but the cold hadn't. Her skin was icy, her pulse faint. She wasn't just another stranger passing through the world. She was the reason he'd been placed on this land, on this day, within reach of that cry. Cole Madrin had spent years running from the echoes of his past. But when he heard that woman's voice carried on the wind, he didn't hear fear. He heard purpose. Or that purpose, for the first time in years, made him feel alive. The moment Cole Madrin's boots left the bank, the river swallowed him whole. The cold hit like a bullet, clean, sharp, absolute. Every muscle in his body locked at once, and for half a heartbeat he couldn't tell which way was up. The Verde had never looked this wild before, swollen by a week of rain. It was no longer a river, but a moving wall of earth, colored water. It roared in his ears, filled his mouth and nose, and clawed at his chest until panic bit deep. The weight of the current crushed him sideways, slamming him against a half-submerged log. Pain shot up his ribs, but he didn't stop. He kicked off, teeth clenched, forcing his body to remember how to move. He'd crossed rivers before on horseback during trail drives, slow, controlled crossings where the men laughed and cursed at the cold. But this was different. There was no laughter here, only survival. Each stroke felt heavier than the last, as if the river itself wanted to test whether he truly meant to save her. He angled his body downstream, letting the current carry him partway, while he fought for direction. The rain blurred the world into a smear of gray. The far bank looked miles away. Twice he lost sight of her. Once he thought she was gone entirely, claimed by the same river that had claimed cattle, wagons, and careless travelers before. Then a flash of color, a torn strip of dress, a hand breaking the surface, pulled him forward. "Hold on," he shouted again, though the words died in the wind. His lungs burned, his shoulders screamed. He had nothing to hold on to except stubborn will. The current twisted, dragging him toward a line of half-buried branches. He ducked beneath them, the sharp ends scraping his back, and surfaced gasping for air. Somewhere ahead her head dipped once, twice, then vanished. He dove. The water turned black. He reached out blindly, fingers brushing against something soft hair. He grabbed hold and pulled. For an instant the current ripped at his grip, threatening to tear her free. He shifted, wrapped his arm around her chest, and kicked upward with everything he had left. They broke the surface together, coughing, choking, her limp weight dragging him under again. He forced her head above water, sucking in air like a man reborn. She didn't respond, her body heavy, unresisting. He could feel her heart flutter faintly against his arm, a fragile rhythm that might quit any second. "Come on," he muttered, half to her, half to himself. Not today. The far bank was closer now, maybe 20 yards. It might as well have been a mile. The current wanted them both. It spun them sideways, slammed them against a drift of debris. The jolt tore skin from his knuckles, but he held on, shoving away from the tangle. He kicked again and again, fighting both gravity and exhaustion. Every inch gained was stolen back by the current. He could feel his legs slowing, the power bleeding out of them like sand through an hourglass. Images flashed behind his eyes. The faces of men he'd ridden with, the ones who hadn't made it through floods, ambushes, or gunfights. Death had a way of sneaking up quiet, wearing different masks. Today it wore the face of a river. He refused to let it win. When his boots brushed mud, he nearly wept. The bottom was soft and shifting, but it was ground. He pushed harder, dragging her through the shallows until his knees hit the bank. With a final surge, he hauled her onto solid earth and collapsed beside her. For a long minute neither of them moved. The rain hissed through the trees, the river hissed behind them, and Cole's heartbeat thundered in his ears louder than both. His arms trembled from the strain, his chest ached as if he'd swallowed fire. He turned toward her. Her face was pale, lips blue, eyes half open but empty. "Come on, girl," he whispered hoarsely. "Breathe." He rolled her onto her side, pressing a hand against her back, forcing water from her lungs. She coughed once, weakly, and a thin stream of river spilled from her mouth. Then again, stronger this time. Relief tore through him so hard it almost hurt. He helped her turn onto her back, brushing mud from her face. Her eyes fluttered, focusing for a heartbeat on the gray sky, then closing again. "Easy," he said. His voice cracked. "You're safe now." "You're safe" was a lie. The wind bit through his wet clothes, and her body trembled violently from the cold. They needed warmth, shelter, fast. But she couldn't walk. He could see that even now. Her legs lay motionless, the muscles slack, as if life had fled them. A strange mixture of panic and pity twisted in his chest. He'd seen crippling wounds before, falls, bullets, broken spines. They always carried the same haunted look in a person's eyes, that sudden understanding that the world they'd known was gone. He pushed the thought away. There was no time for pity. She was alive, and that was enough. The slope back to the ridge looked twice as steep as it had before. He wiped water from his face, gathered his strength, and slid his arms beneath her. She weighed next to nothing, but his muscles screamed as he lifted her. The wet fabric clung to both of them, a cold and heavy as lead. He tightened his grip and began the climb. Each step was a war. The mud sucked at his boots, the rain made the rocks slick. Once he slipped and nearly fell, catching himself against a root. She stirred faintly, whispering something in Apache, words he couldn't understand but felt deep in his bones. A prayer, maybe, or a goodbye. "Don't you quit on me," he muttered, breath ragged. "We're almost there." He climbed until his vision blurred. until his arms went numb and his lungs burned like he'd swallowed smoke. Finally, the outline of the cabin appeared through the mist. His small, lonely refuge of rough, cut logs and a sagging porch. It had never looked so precious. He kicked the door open with his heel and stumbled inside, laying her gently on the rug beside the cold hearth. His own knees gave out, and he dropped beside her, chest heaving. The fire had died to a faint orange glow, a few embers clinging stubbornly to life. He threw kindling onto it, then a log, coaxing it back to flame. The smoke stung his eyes, but when the fire caught, the sight of its light spreading across the room filled him with something close to gratitude. He stripped off his soaked shirt and draped a heavy wool blanket over her. Her skin was icy to the touch, her pulse thin and fast. He rubbed her arms, trying to coax warmth back into them. When her eyes opened, they were wide with confusion and fear. She tried to move, but her legs stayed still. "Don't," he said softly. "You're hurt. Rest." She looked at him, lips trembling. "No walk," she whispered in broken English. "No walk." The words struck him like a hammer. He'd known it already, but hearing it tore something open inside him. He looked away, jaw tight, then met her eyes again. "You'll be all right," he lied gently. "You just need time." Outside, the storm began to fade, the sound of rain softening to a whisper. Inside, the crackle of the fire grew louder, filling the silence between them. Cole fetched water, held the cup to her lips when her hands shook too badly to hold it. She drank a little, then turned her face away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. He didn't ask why. Some pain didn't need words. He sat back on his heels, staring into the flames. The reflection danced on the wet floorboards, on her face, on his trembling hands. He'd spent years trying to leave behind the part of himself that cared too much. The part that got men killed, that made him take risks no sane man would take. But looking at her now, that part of him stirred again. The river had tested him, forced him to remember what it meant to fight for something other than survival. Out there in that chaos of water and mud, he had felt it, the line between life and death, and the small, stubborn spark that refused to go out. That spark was still burning now, reflected in the eyes of the woman he'd pulled from the current. Cole leaned back in his chair, muscles aching, and listened to the steady rhythm of the river outside. It sounded different now, not like a threat, but like a heartbeat, a reminder. For the first time in years, he wasn't just living to escape the past. He was living because someone needed him to. And that, he realized as the firelight settled over the cabin walls, was the kind of fight worth facing any storm for.